In the beginning of the 1970s, the US and China had not had any diplomatic or economic relations for over 20 years. They had even been enemies on many battlegrounds in those years, in and around Vietnam and on the Korean Peninsula. But in 1971, everything changed with a game of ping pong. The American table tennis team was invited to visit China after the 31st World Table Tennis Championships hosted in Nagoya, Japan. This exchange marked a new beginning in US-China relations, and was flaunted by then President Nixon as a great achievement in international diplomacy. It was an exciting news item to be sure, and piqued the interest of a certain impressionable high schooler in Minneapolis, my father. China was a place that had long been hidden, even known colloquially as the Hidden Kingdom, and the idea of going to this place and engaging with their culture was completely novel and exciting. In 1984, my dad spent a summer studying abroad in Tianjin through the University of Minnesota. The U of M was one of the first big institutions to begin academic and cultural exchange between American and Chinese students, shortly after relations began to develop in the early 1970s, and they've been a leader in academic relations with China ever since. He became enamored with the Chinese language and its people, and ended up staying the whole of the next academic year in the country, but not in academia. My dad started off by visiting a good friend in the city of Qingdao, originally a German concession and well known for its prolific breweries. He heard that from Qingdao he could take a boat to Shanghai down the coast, did that, and then discovered that he could hop on another barge to travel up the Yangtze River. He spent a week chugging up the most significant waterway in China as the only foreigner on a boat filled with hundreds of people. He had a great year of adventure, and after returning to the States felt that he didn't really want to stay far from China for too long. He began working for a tour company on their China trips. His language fluency and connections on the ground made him an ideal guide. This was at a time when the tourist industry in China was only beginning to form, after decades of closed-door policies. My dad was still going to school, and leading trips to China between semesters and during any significant holiday breaks. Eventually he met my mother, and stopped the touring gig so they could settle down and start a family. My dad taught Chinese in high school, and both of my parents worked at Chinese language immersion camp in the summers and lived with us there, so our connections to China stayed strong. After raising my older sister and I for a few years, and having just had my younger sister, my parents decided that it was time for a change. They both wanted to travel the world, but traveling with small children is hard, let alone 3 of them. So they came up with a creative solution. Instead of traveling abroad with their children, they would just move to China with them. The year was already 2000 by then, and US-China relations had only grown stronger with time. Ford, Reagan, and Clinton had all made presidential visits during their terms. The Peace Corps had now extended their programs into China, and China was about to join the World Trade Organization. Through an old friend, Dad found a job teaching English at a local university in Beijing. The position provided housing and transportation, and China had public health care, so the only thing left to do was to buy the plane tickets, which they promptly did. This is how I ended up spending 2 very formative years of my life as a young child in Beijing. My sister attended the Chinese equivalent of kindergarten, You'er, and I joined her the second year, though I would constantly tell my parents that I had just decided I wouldn't go to school. I'd just stay at home and play badminton in the streets with Madia instead. Madia is a local woman who ran a de facto daycare center in her home for all of the young kids in the neighborhood who had working parents. For the first year, my younger sister and I would spend most of our days hanging out at Madia's flat, eating and speaking and playing within a group of 6 to 15 children on any given day. We were the only white kids, but it didn't seem to change anything. Madia and her husband, who we called Bye Bye, took care of us as their own, and to this day I feel like they are my second set of parents. My aunt and cousin came to visit us over the winter one year, and I remember sliding down the snowy Great Wall like it was a giant ice slide. Near the end of the second year, the SARS epidemic came to light in China. It was eventually made clear that the Chinese government had hidden the severity of the crisis from the people in order to not have it overshadow the annual Chinese congressional gathering that was coming up in Beijing. In a short time, people became very worried about the illness. Nobody trusted the national media anymore, and the public health system became inundated with serious cases, to the point where at the hospitals they stopped seeing people for minor illnesses. It was after bringing my younger sister to a hospital to be seen for some type of cold virus that my parents decided they couldn't rely on healthcare in China anymore, and we would be going back to America. However, this wasn't the end of our relationship with China. The SARS scare eventually faded, and after moving back, my dad started leading high school study abroad groups to China for a few weeks every summer, and the whole family would tag along. We would help out and hang out with the students, travel around the country going on great adventures with the group, And at some point, Mom and the kids would always get to go back to Beijing and hang out at Majian and Baibai's home for a while, just like old times. Through this annual pilgrimage and our continued involvement with Chinese camp, as well as all of the Chinese friends we have living in the U.S., I have never been far from Chinese culture for long. In 2009, when the recession hit, study abroad programs were among the first to be cut, and our family stopped returning to China together annually. So this past year, after graduating high school and being away from my Chinese family for over 3 years, I went back there myself. I spent 5 months traveling around Taiwan and China, seeing family, making new friends, and exploring the deep-rooted connection that I have grown there. My intercultural experience has in a way been a product of greater forces that have shaped the relationship between the U.S. and China over the years, and increasingly intertwined the fates of these two nations. I find myself at a powerful intersection of culture and identity, and I am thankful for my parents who decided to take that leap and build a bridge between worlds.